Welcome to this episode of Leaders with Purpose. I'm Rebecca Hull. I'm Managing Director here at Manifesto, and today we're joined by Martine Parnell, Director of Membership, Marketing and Digital at the Royal Horticultural Society.
I'm Lula, your co-host and Chief Client and Transformation Officer at Manifesto. And in today's episode, we explore the highs and lows of transformation, what it means to strategically prioritise with purpose at the heart, and an AI chat botanist. So, welcome to the podcast. For the purposes of this podcast and to save all the tongue twisting, we're going to refer to the organisation as the RHS.
Thank you, Lou, and welcome, Martine. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. We've been getting to know each other recently and so appreciative of you giving up some time to be here today. I think for the benefit of people who don't know you or don't know the RHS, perhaps you could just tell a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. It's really exciting to be here. I'm Martine. I'm on the exec leadership team of the RHS. We are the UK's gardening charity. And our kind of vision is for the world to be aware kind of everyone can embrace and enjoy the benefits of gardening and growing plants. So whether that's just for the joy and fulfillment it brings or for the benefits to kind of physical and mental health, building stronger communities and kind of thriving environments as well. So that's kind of the core of our work. You may have visited one of our 5 RHS gardens around the country or been to one of our RHS shows. And the best known of that is the RHS Chelsea Flower Show. And those kind of places and spaces and RHS membership, we use that to fund the really important work that we do across kind of 3 main areas for the charity. So one of those is around education and learning. And we work with over half of the schools in the country to bring growing plants, learning about nature to kind of children and young adults as well. We have an extensive community program that runs across the country. And we also have a significant interest in science. So we have our own team at RHS Wisley, our own team of scientists, and we fund over 35 researchers and PhDs really around areas of sustainability, environmental science. How do we mitigate the impact of climate change? How can kind of gardening and cultivated plants support kind of health and well-being? So quite a wide area of work for the charity.
Yeah, great organisation. I have been to Wisley. I have been to the Chelsea Flower Show. Plants are definitely the future. So big fans of the RHS here. But you, and I would we'll come back and talk about the proposition because you've got a really interesting, I think, sort of diversified member strategy. But you haven't always been in the not-for-profit sector. So tell us a little bit about your time before joining the RHS.
Yeah, so the RHS is my first not-for-profit role. I absolutely love it. It's an absolute delight. I worked for many years in the commercial sector. I worked for larger corporates and I worked for startups. Many years ago, I started my career for the Financial Times. It was a really exciting time. Pearson, which was the owner of the FT, was led by Marjorie Scardino, the kind of first female FTSE 100 CEO. So it was just really exciting times. And the FT was doing really exciting stuff with digital. So a great place to start my career quite some time ago. And then I worked for a range of different organisations across media. I worked for ITV. I worked for a now long forgotten social media organisation called Friends Reunited. I worked across kind of fintech, Zopa, which is now a bank, and I also worked in ticketing. So yeah, I'd really kind of focused on digital and marketing, but a kind of range of different sizes and types of organisation.
Yeah, fascinating. So Friends Reunited, I mean, that's a podcast in itself.
Blast from the past.
What was your sort of impression of the not-for-profit sector before you started, and then what unfolded for you?
So I'd for decades had been curious about the not-for-profit sector. Really enjoyed my commercial roles. Really enjoyed what I was doing, but always had that kind of like purpose, itch kind of thing, wanting to find out what that would mean for me. So I saw the RHS role. I was a gardener, so I instinctively understood the benefits that kind of growing plants can bring to people. And I love the organisation. And so it's something that I really jumped at to do and haven't really looked back. I find that the purpose that the RHS gives me to be a huge kind of motivating factor. I love it. I feel it's absolutely the right decision for me.
And is there anything that you've had to sort of unlearn as you've kind of progressed, your time at the RHS? And is there anything that you think that's very specific to the commercial sector that's helped you sort of get up to speed and get impactful in your role?
I think most of it is really similar, and good leadership in not-for-profit and good leadership in commercial comes from the same place. I suppose, particularly having spent some time in startups, it is very much a vibe of as I think it was the Facebook piece, move fast and break things, which is a real vibe. And that is useful because it brings pace. But when you come to an organization that, has been going since 1804, that has all of this really important long-running science work, you have to slightly nuance, I think, how you approach pace in order to sustain what is most important and most wonderful about these organizations as well. So I think it's about just getting a bit of balance, I suppose, development, learning to balance a few different factors.
Yeah. How has your experience been of getting sort of change through and approved? I think there's a perception that, organisations like not-for-profits can be a bit slow, or governance is a bit onerous, and there is often a more complex governance structure. Has that been your experience at all?
Certainly the governance structure is more complex when you have trustees. There are, I think, typically more trustees on not-for-profit board than you might have on some corporate boards. And that is more complex, but also actually brings a really great variety of perspective. So, I do enjoy that. I think in a not-for-profit, you're potentially balancing more the kind of priorities around fundraising or raising income and charitable impact. And so I just think you have a slightly more complex, chess set of decisions to make. But you still want to have that pace, really. You still want to make the right decision and make it quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's a tension we see play out across all of our clients, the ambition to want to do everything, but then having to make some difficult choices. So we'll come back to how you prioritise. But your career, you without a doubt have been, caught up and have led, I imagine, numerous sort of digital transformation in sort of quotes, kind of programmes and projects, for good and for bad. So we hear people talk about digital transformation a lot now, and I think that the meaning of that is changing. And so when you talk about it, what are you really describing to your sort of stakeholders or your organisation?
I suppose this is another, actually going back to your previous question, this was another learning is when you're working possibly in a startup or in a new department or division of an organisation on something digital, you're doing it from the ground up, you're doing it from scratch. And that is so much easier and faster and often less expensive than when you have to transform or pull out long-standing tech. So I think that was an adjustment for me as well. It was possibly an overconfidence of, it's easy to drive through kind of digital change, whereas actually it's a much more complex project when you're trying to replace tech that's possibly been in there a long time. I think it's fair to say that in not-for-profits, often there has been less long-standing investment in tech. And that means that you're kind of working often with legacy tech that then needs to be, replaced. And that is a kind of harder and slower process through which to innovate.
Yeah, we've been touching a lot in this podcast on sort of the importance of foundations, the importance of doing perhaps the sort of unsexy stuff first before you get to the shiny widgets. So, but you will undoubtedly have some sort of scar tissue or war wounds, as we all do from sort of digital transformation, the gift that keeps on giving. But what have you? What have you learned over time that you think, if we don't do this, we're not going to succeed? What are your sort of mainstays of kind of leadership in that space?
I think with all of these things, you've got to, as a team, I guess, lean into the hard stuff. Yeah. And often it's the piece that maybe feels more distant from the purpose for the teams, because you're not necessarily on the front line of delivering that change or the community program or what really excites you about the organization. You have to make sure that the kind of foundational tech is in the right place and done right. So that is a challenge that you've kind of got to talk about I think, with teams and the importance of that kind of heavy lifting work that needs to be done. And sometimes those projects are short and sharp, and sometimes they are, longer, but they're vitally important, because unless you have those foundations in place, you're not going to be able to deliver your vision for the next 5 years. You are creating a millstone for that organization, for that charity, and that's not what anyone wants to do.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you're building a house, you need good electrics before you can buy it. Like a designer sofa. And everyone just wants the sofa first.
Yes, The sofa's more fun to shop for, right? Yeah.
Definitely. What's your, I mean, that's a lot of that heavy lifting, we imagine it to be sort of like technical work, if you sense, but actually I think a lot of the heavy lifting is sort of taking people on that journey and managing the resistance. And you said sitting with the difficult things. Mm-hmm. What's been your experience of having to take sort of teams of people who may or may not be on board with your change, and do you have an evolving sense of what really works for you when you are tackling change from a people and teams perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say there is that we try and mix heavy lifting and shiny widgets. Going back to your previous point, is I think it's nice to have a mixture on the roadmap, and it is great to be able to empower people to do work quickly, as well as kind of moving through those kind of long transformation projects. I think that balance is important because people like to see progress. And the RHS, we're often releasing really great, quick projects that deliver an impact for audiences. And that is so great to see. And I think that keeps people motivated when they kind of turn back to that longer running program that possibly has more difficult change. I think that's a nice balance to maintain. I think I would hope that I am really honest with my teams about what things are going to be like, how things might be difficult. What is the available funding for this project? How do we kind of shape that to make it work? I think that honesty is important. You want to recruit and retain really smart people. And with really smart people, you need to give them the accurate facts, and then they can do fantastic work. So I think that's really important, particularly when you're going through challenging change programs where you've got to look at different ways to do things. The budget is never enough, right? Yeah. In any sector, in anything, the budget is never enough. So you have to make some quite precise choices about where you're going to prioritize it.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about that really stuck with me when you were very emphatic about the sort of guiding purpose of the RHS is what helps you make decisions. And I think sometimes what can be difficult in change or even in the day-to-day in BAU is that it's harder for those who lead below us to kind of prioritise, and sometimes the change kind of gets stuck there. How do you approach prioritisation? How do you sort of get your leadership teams underneath you to take that on board?
I think I'm helped at the RHS because the strategy program that we did a couple of years ago with our Director General, it was a really good piece of work. Our DG really engaged the organisation, took the time to ask people to get people to contribute to what that vision, what that strategy would be. And so that is a really strong foundation for us to be able to come back to when we're asking ourselves the question of, which project comes first? What can we afford to do? Which is the most important? So it's really nice to have that kind of common currency, I think, to go back to in a really kind of well laid down strategy, because it's really helpful. It's really helpful. And then I would say on top of that, and we talked about this a little bit before around kind of data-enabled decision-making, giving people access to the data to help them make a decision themselves that is well-founded is hugely important, because you can't have all the decisions coming down from the top or the leadership team. You want to empower people to make the right decision and give them the tools to do that.
Absolutely.
I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about open strategy, about subject matter experts being empowered to make data-led decision. And I know something you mentioned, Martine, was around removing the bias and being aware of that bias. So if we sort of dig into like strategy execution is easier said than done in terms of like you have the vision, it's really clear, but actually what are the big strategic bets you're making, what are you not going to do is just as important
and harder.
Exactly. It's really hard to say no because you have passion flowing through an organisation and, having a really focused strategy allows you to make those kind of decisions. So if we think about execution, so you spoke a lot about kind of multidisciplinary teams and kind of bringing people from disparate backgrounds, different expertise together to deliver kind of against outcomes. Like, what's your approach to setting those teams up for success and what have you learned along the way?
Yeah, so this was something that I was lucky to encounter relatively early on in my career in those kind of startup structures where you would bring together a squad of people with very different reporting lines. And you'd effectively kind of have one subject matter expert from each area in order to deliver on programs. You keep it quite tight, quite a small group of people, and you give them a project and you'd bring together, those different skill sets to execute. I found that incredibly successful in a more pure digital environment. And so, with some of my colleagues, that's something that we have continued to do within the RHS. And some of those skill sets may look different than in a pure digital environment, but that's been really effective. And I think while that feels weird for people the first time to not work with their kind of core team, but to come into a cross-functional team, I think, the magic's in the middle there. That's when you have great conversations with people with different skill sets. And I think their problem solving is better in that cross-functional group. I think people just work really well together once they get the hang of it. I think it's a great way of getting things done quickly.
Yeah. And are there sort of baseline skills that you're kind of investing in for teams to kind of set them up for success? So, we spoke a little bit about Agile, and we're not talking about pure software development Agile, but there are like rhythms and ceremonies that can support people, and also kind of what does it mean to be part of a team and some of those sort of skills?
Yes, so we have taken in a light touch way some of that methodology from Agile out of the digital and IT teams and used that in different areas, in different cross-functional teams, made it work in slightly different ways. And that's been really helpful, I think, to get focus. Another thing that as a leadership team, we kind of noted about ourselves in the organization that we needed a little bit more skills and practice around project management. When we look at the operational plan, you're launching multiple projects. You really want to empower teams to kind of lead and get that done. And I think you need to give them some of the skills to do that. So that's a piece of work we're doing at the moment. We've got a really great chief of staff at the RHS who's looking at how do you, in a lightweight way, just give people even the toolkit, the checklist they need to start a project really well. And that solves all of the kind of who's doing what later on challenges that have the potential to slow down work. So that's something that, we're in at the moment. And I think that will have a really good impact on how quickly we deliver.
Definitely. And we've, at Manifesto, we, ran intro to Agile coaching sessions for many, many years to kind of support organizations and just seeing the value of this and then trying it. We're not ever saying it's wholesale and it's not appropriate in certain things, but actually some of those principles can stand you in good stead.
Yep.
You mentioned around like skills in terms of like ambiguity and leading around uncertainty, and particularly sort of Agile. If we think about the Agile where we sort of execute, we're iterating and we're moving towards something. How are you building that resilience within the organization to really kind of be okay with ambiguity and uncertainty?
Yeah, and I think you really have to be, because it's coming at you every day. And I think one of the things, so the RHS raises that really important income to fund our charitable work. And we do that in many ways from what happens at our RHS gardens or RHS shows and member visits. And, we hope that people can have an amazing time. They'll learn something, but also they might have a coffee, maybe a sandwich, and maybe buy something on the way out that supports the charity. We're an outdoor-based experience, I suppose, if you think about it. And so we are absolutely at the mercy of the British weather. And dare I say, on top of that, increasing unpredictability from the climate as well. And so that teaches you, whether you like it or not, to be comfortable with ambiguity and change, because you can put all the plans in place and it's great weather and something is a huge success, or the weather is terrible and it didn't come out the way you wanted to in terms of your KPIs. So that is a tough lesson, and it's a lesson that we learn like 7 days a week, every week. But also I think that drives resilience because it allows you to understand how you kind of got to get back up, dust yourself off, and then think, what are we going to do about next month? So that's kind of part of our culture, I guess, because of the type of way that we raise income for the charity.
Yeah. So when you write your strategy, is it true to say that when you're planning something that has a potential exposure to outside risk, that you're planning for a number of scenarios rather than we're just doing this? I mean, it sounds like that's probably something that is quite built into your culture, but I don't think lots of organisations think about strategy in that way.
I think when you have the overarching multi-year strategy, and then obviously you have a kind of 3-year and then down to more of an annual plan, which tends to be quite KPI led, right? You've got to raise the money in order to create the impact. And I think within that, we want to set ourselves ambitious targets, we want to set ourselves stretching targets, because that's really important. We have big ambitions as a charity. But also I think just knowing that it's not necessarily going to be playing out across the months exactly as you thought it would. And therefore, what flexibility do you need to build in? How do you roll with changes? I actually think that's probably about having a really great plan and putting that time into planning, because if your plan is good, you can deal with what's going wrong more easily. So it's absolutely not about just going, oh, who knows what's going to happen? Let's give it a go. It's about having that plan, but also giving people the confidence, I suppose, that if, week 1 was not on target, what are we going to do differently to kind of pick that up in the weeks that follow?
Yeah.
And be intentionally responsive, which is,
yes,
I guess, something we've spoken up to some of the organisations we work with, is rather than sort of just surviving this uncertainty, this ambiguity, like how do you build strategic, intentional responsiveness within the organisation, which, again, as you said, sort of comes back to that really clear vision, the really clear strategy, and you've got a plan, but also you've got some movement in the organisation to pivot and adapt to what's going on.
Yeah. I think that adaptability is key. And if you think about, I suppose, the trends in technology, a rapidly changing world, I think, adaptability is a good skill that we should all do our best to cultivate.
Definitely. And with so membership as a proposition, we work with lots of membership organisations, but also kind of not-for-profits where actually sort of people aren't giving more, it's less people giving more, so the market necessarily isn't growing. And so I guess we wondered from sort of the RHS perspective, kind of your sort of income strategy for expanding membership, looking at other ways to increase revenue, like where are you at in terms of that sort of strategy?
So I would say that we are lucky because we have different strands through which we raise income, whether that's pure fundraising with our donors, grant giving organisations, whether it's membership, whether it's visitors just coming for the day to a show, and hopefully we make some of that income through catering and retail. So we've got quite a few different avenues for income. That does bring with it complexity in the organisation on the other side of it, but we do have a few different options, and that does mitigate somewhat against weather or against kind of crazy things happening in that you didn't expect. We've just been and continued to go through a period around our largest garden, RHS Wisley, where we're surrounded by cones and roadworks for the M25. Not something you can plan for or control, really. So having a few different locations, different revenue streams really helps as a charity. So I think that's important. I think we're really fortunate though, because with a gardening charity, and between 25 and 30 million people in the UK garden, and so there's a huge base of interest of all sorts of different people gardening in different ways, from a window box, pots on a balcony, people who love houseplants, people who have, a small backyard, people who are, gardening intensively and it's their absolute love. So we have broad-based kind of support and audiences who love to engage with us in different ways, coming to see us, maybe digitally. So I'm pretty optimistic about, audiences now and audiences in the future. And it's really about us to find the best ways to engage with those audiences, really, as we go forward.
How close to you are you as an organisation to having a sort of a single sort of customer view, because it sounds like there are so many sort of multiple touch points and points of interest, and sort of audience strategies become more complex and critical to organisations' future success. It's a problem that everyone is grappling with.
It is a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of people, and it's a challenge in terms of technology. So we have 5 gardens, multiple shows. We've actually got gardens and offices. We've got 7 permanent sites. We've got our colleagues and volunteers are spread across multiple different sites. As you can imagine, organisations that have grown over time, that means we probably have a slightly different tech system in each and every place, all kind of strung together. So that's difficult on the single customer view. We're doing some work on that at the moment to bring that together. I think if you can make it easy for people to get hold of the data, that they're more inclined to use it and make those decisions that we talked about earlier. But then on top of that, you need quite a clear and relatively simple, I think, audience plan that sits on top of that to bring people together. We're working on our audience development plan at the moment, both kind of based on quite deep data and metrics, but also then some kind of simpler pen portraits that allow people to kind of focus a project and an audience and really know what they're doing with that.
Just coming back to your sort of your earlier sort of conversation about change, and sort of it sounds like sort of there's a cycle of sort of constant change happening, and I really like your approach of you're bringing together these multidisciplinary teams. I completely agree. I think it removes quite a lot of the echo chamber and actually quite a lot of the obstacles, but sort of something that's conditional for success is psychological safety within those teams, particularly if they're kind of forming, disbanding, and so I'm interested in your view around that and how you try and instill that, or have seen it sort of work particularly well.
Yeah, I think psychological safety is hugely important, because I come back to the point, try and find the smartest and most passionate people you can, recruit them and retain them, and then let them do their best work for the organisation. And that means that they have to be able to be empowered to work, and they have to be able to turn around and say, no, I don't think that's the right way forward. I think that's wrong. And certainly my team does. I think if you ask them, they are, a frank team that communicates really well, and they're willing to kind of raise views and challenge things, which is fantastic. That makes me better at my job. I'm very grateful for that kind of environment to work in with my team. So I think, yes, it's hugely important. When you're going on to projects, are you kind of forming and storming quite a lot of the time? Yeah, definitely. And people have to get used to working in different kind of groupings. But again, I think you learn, from projects, but you also really learn from people. And what's really lovely about the RHS is that, you're working with scientists, you're working with horticulturalists, you're working with people with just really different backgrounds or training or skill sets than I have. And I find that really energizing. And I hope the teams do as well.
How out in the open are these teams working? So we are definitely in the spirit of working out in the open when we're pulling together multidisciplinary teams, and we're normally blended with organisations we're working with, but it's kind of showing work in progress, being open about learnings and challenges. Like, what's the culture of sharing learnings, good and bad, within the organisation?
I think there's always room for improvement on that. That continuous improvement is really vital. But I think it is pretty good. And I think, again, you can borrow some techniques from the kind of digital world there about doing a project and having a retro about it. What was good? What was bad? What could we do differently next time? Did we get that quite right? And I think that culture of curiosity and continuous improvement is important, and it makes all of us humble, because nothing was ever executed perfectly. So, if you kind of look back on it, there's always room for improvement. I think that is just culturally really important. And you think of the RHS and growing plants and gardens, they are themselves in kind of constant change, times of the year, the weather. And so again, that's kind of inherent in our culture, I think, that sense of things always changing and what can we do better and how are we going to change or improve this, which makes it a really nice culture to work in.
Yeah. And as sort of leaders in the organisation, because we've definitely worked with some where actually there's a fear of failure within the organisation, which makes it difficult to experiment, to test. And so, there's a big sort of, I guess, role for leaders to play with an organisation to actually create that space. I guess, Rebecca, what you were saying about psychological safety, but also kind of creating the conditions for innovation, for curiosity, for ideas to kind of flourish.
Yeah.
What's your view on kind of leaders being able to create that space?
I think it's hugely important, isn't it, that people feel that they can take the right level of risk to experiment and innovate and try something new. A lot of our organisation is very creative. If you think of the creative experience of a garden or of a show. And so I think people are always looking actually to want to do new and more and exciting things. And I think bringing that kind of creativity together, again, going back to that point on, can you give people the data? Can you teach testing frameworks that allow us to ask, is this the right thing to do? Let's innovate this and let's see what happens. I think that's really important, because then, again, it's not a conversation about opinion or who in the room is more senior to the other person. It's merely like, let's test this, and then what does the data tell you afterwards?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point that you make about sort of the makeup of creativity in an organisation, because by definition, that's a sort of discipline that's much more open to, iteration, work in progress, being comfortable with having your work critiqued, looking to develop it and collaborate. But it sounds as if you're really living kind of agile in its sort of, in spirit. And I think lots of organisations say to us, we need to be more agile. What does it mean? I think it's just like this badge, this diploma, and it's just sort of progress over perfection. Get the basics nailed right, know where you're going, but know that you might have to deviate at some point.
Yeah. And I think it's about, if you take on board that continuous iteration, that continuous improvement, that you're kind of honing in on the target, you never quite get there, you're always course correcting. I think that feels like what working life is, to be honest, as an experience. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Talking of innovation and experimentation, so you've got your Grow app. And so it would be great to understand, like, what was the insight behind that and what's the sort of outcome that you're trying to achieve with that? And I guess probably building on Rebecca's point, that's a whole nother data ecosystem that exists now within the organisation. How is that kind of coming back in to help the wider mission?
Yeah. And the data is fascinating, right? So the Grow app was really, we had this was part of a kind of a conversation, a thread around digital transformation, because we have very large volumes of people coming to our website for gardening advice. So we see above 26 million people a year coming to the RHS digital platform looking for gardening advice. And that had always been a kind of look for the information, read it, and then kind of go and do it, which for me was lacking something in experience. And we kind of felt there was this space for a more digital type of engagement with the RHS that looked, I guess, a little bit about membership, because, you're engaging and you're supporting the charity on a kind of repeat billing basis as a supporter, as a donor. But rather than wanting to come and visit the places and spaces, you possibly live a little bit further away from one of our gardens, but you really want the gardening advice. And so the Grow app was something we developed. People can record all the plants in their garden or their home on it, and we give them gardening tips. We've got an AI-powered chat botanist, which was trained by our fantastic horticultural advisory team. So it is just the advice of the RHS, not the kind of wilds of the internet, kind of adding to that. So it's a quality source of advice, and we've kind of got plant combinations on it. So it's just a really useful tool for the audiences who are using it. And for us, it's a really important resource, because we therefore understand what people are growing in their gardens, what is working for them, what's not working for them. And as a science resource, understanding cultivated plants kind of mapped across the UK, that's a really, really useful resource for, some of the work that we're doing in science and kind of future resilience of the UK and our plants.
Yeah. And does that sort of data, I assume, holds value outside of the organisation if we think about kind of broader sustainability, the impact of the climate? And so are you able to kind of share that expertise and that data and insight, for broader, I guess, change or impact outside of just the RHS? Yeah,
and I think a lot of that collaboration happens through our scientists. So as well as the scientists that we have who work on site for the RHS and who are, constantly collaborating with their peers in different organisations. The RHS also funds and mentors PhDs in universities around the country. So that information, that kind of flow of information and scientific knowledge is part of the RHS, and that data from RHS Grow also then feeds into that information and how that is shared and how people use that for different projects and programs as well.
Amazing. We're going to talk a little bit about hope, but whilst it's in my head, I'd really like to understand, because I think there's so much sort of gloom and doom is like glib, but there's lots of like concern about the environment, the climate, the sort of biodiversity. Are you seeing trends coming through your data collection at whatever point that kind of give you reasons to be sort of optimistic that that things could be okay?
Yes. So I think I absolutely hear what you say. I think that kind of climate anxiety rests with all of us. It is scary, all of the things that you read and what the future may hold. I think where we are fortunate in our work is that we offer a way, with a bit of support and advice for people to make a difference. It sometimes feels like it's really hard to make a difference on that kind of big global scale. And indeed, in your domestic space, possibly if you rent, or it's hard to make really big, expensive changes in your own home. A lot of those kind of sustainability changes in your home is still have quite a high price tag for many people across the country. But in your garden, that is a place where you can make small changes that have huge impact for biodiversity. We've just relaunched our science around plants for pollinators, so people can understand what plants they should plant if they want to really support pollinators. And there's relatively small changes that you can make in your own place, which have a positive impact. And I think that is hugely empowering for all of us to feel that you can make a difference in what you do at home. And if you put together, all of the gardens across the UK, that is actually a huge space of lots of people working together in a really positive way. So that's a cause for optimism for me, because you think of all of those gardeners making a couple of small changes and the impact that can have. I suppose I'm optimistic about the people, and I see how our members engage with the work that we do around sustainability, the tips and advice that we put out. That gives me great hope.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, the small actions all add up.
Yeah.
That's a very meaningful, accessible action that anyone can make.
So I guess building on, your optimism, we're sort of, thinking about like hope for leaders, because actually, a lot of the conversations we're having right now is just, it's a really challenging time to be a leader. And so what are your hopes as being a leader in a sort of membership visit kind of sort of sector that you want to see happen?
We are always, I think, hungry as an organisation for growth in our audiences. We want to engage with more people in more ways, more students, more learners, more visitors, more people digitally. So I'm optimistic about that. It's not without its challenges. As everyone is seeing across the sector, it is not a terribly buoyant economy for fundraising, potentially. So you've really kind of got to think about what you want to deliver on that one. But I think, I'm optimistic for growth. We've got some kind of great projects and programs going through. The RHS will all rejoice when the cones around RHS Wisley and Junction 10 are removed, which I think will be great for us. But that's just one example. I think it's looking for those exciting growth projects. It's looking for meaningful growth of audiences and meaningful engagement with audiences.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that the CRM project that is in flight now, but also kind of digital technology, how you're connecting everything, is hopefully going to be quite a big either catalyst or accelerator for you kind of being able to realise that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting those kind of, you used the word, I think, tech basics, getting that kind of basic plumbing, I suppose, in place will be great for people's access for data, for making quick decisions, for being able to innovate and react to the insight we get about what our members, what our audiences want, and innovate more quickly, I suppose, in the tools that we give them. I think that'll be really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to getting to the other side of that and reminding myself to keep talking to the team about what the destination looks like, because the destination can seem a long way when you're halfway through a very, very long spreadsheet of requirements or testing, whatever that may be. So it's how do you kind of remind yourself that actually there's a great destination to get to, and that everybody's work, those hours that people put in, those weeks that people put in, is really important to get there.
Coming back to, as one of the themes of this podcast is, the sort of changing face of leadership. And I think there are specific sort of tensions maybe about being a leader in a purpose-led organisation that we've touched upon. But for you, what's your observation about how sort of the demands of you as a leader has changed over time?
I mean, I have the perception, I don't know if everyone has this perception, whether it's true or not, that pace increases. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I think the fact that we all moved across to kind of whatever, Zoom or Teams or whatever you use, that you're kind of constantly kind of context switching to get more done, while knowing that they are powerful tools for collaboration. Actually, I think we are getting more done as a result, but that is definitely driving pace. That is both an opportunity and a challenge. I think whether this is a change or not, I think that importance of remaining really curious at all times. What is happening with the kind of wider world? What will some of the technology changes mean for organizations? How you engage with audiences? You've got to stay curious about that, and you've got to kind of, I think, make it fun and easy to be curious for all of the teams about things. Like, let's ask the questions, even if we don't know the answers yet. Let's kind of stay interested in what the future may hold. And then probably an observation actually is working in this often more remote environment, or you're bringing together these cross-functional teams. They might not all be on the same site, so you're increasingly doing that digitally. Is probably for me as a learning is the importance of repetition, and this links back to the purpose. So just remembering to go back and repeat the kind of why we're doing this. This is the purpose. This is the strategy. This is why this piece of work fits in. I think that's something that I kind of have on my own learning agenda to do and to continue to do, even more so in periods of kind of rapid pace and rapid change as well.
Yeah, agreed. We talk about this because I think it's really hard as a leader if you think, I just can only hear the sound of my own voice saying this thing again and again. But I think the science that says something, you have to say something 7 times through different channels before it's actually sort of received and understood. Yeah. I think also that repetition creates a sense of consistency and clarity, and with that comes safety, because people know what to expect. We're reminded we're all on the same path. I sort of feel like I'm in a container of people and process and plans, and we're going.
Yeah, and we're working towards a common goal, and this is how these different pieces of work fit together towards that common goal.
Exactly. How do you? So you talked about your garden. What gives you energy? This is tough. It's all tough work. The context switching, the pace. It's definitely getting faster. It's not your imagination. That's definitely my experience anyway. How do you sort of manage your energy rather than your time?
I think it is important to manage your energy, even if you've got 8 catch-ups that day. You have to show up and be present and give your best for each person who's there. You expect that of that person, you expect it of yourself. So, I mean, I'm lucky because I work in an organization that has recognized that importance of getting out in nature and just getting outside. And there's increasing science actually about how it doesn't have to be a really long time outside in nature among kind of green plants just to recharge your batteries or take that kind of, slightly uptight stress feeling you might have about something just down a few notches. So that can be really, really effective in relatively short periods of time. And, how lucky am I that one of my working locations is at RHS Wisley. So you can kind of wander around outside. You can actually see your audiences there enjoying themselves. They're right in front of your eyes from an insight point of view. So I think getting just recharging your batteries so that you're present and focused for all of the people in your team.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a marketer's dream, being amongst your
I know, it's fantastic.
Audience day in, day out. Like that is a really lovely position to be in.
If you've got a question, you can go and ask somebody. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've got some quantitative insight that I'd like to share, folks. Love that.
And then you can hug a tree.
Exactly. Re-energise. And do you know what? sometimes it's the simplicity of some of those things. And Rebecca, you're a massive advocate, and it's part of our sort of manifesto values is stop, take a breath, pause, find that space. Otherwise you're just running into stuff as opposed to having that moment to think. And so even myself at home, if I'm not in the office, is forcing myself in the morning and in the evening to leave the house.
Yeah, just open the door and go out for 5 or 10
minutes. To understand that that's where percolation, reflection happens. It's not me clicking a mouse and hoping that the answer will appear, in my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting outside, I love gardening. I think getting your hands in the soil is just a really kind of mindful and therapeutic thing to do, and really recharges your batteries.
So we've got 2 questions to wrap up. So the first one is kind of advice. So I guess reflecting on your journey, everything that you're learning and still to learn, what advice would you give to leaders kind of now or in the future sort of generations?
I guess 2 things, and we've probably touched on them. I think one is about continuous learning and curiosity. So accepting that you don't always know and you're not always right is hugely empowering, because you're constantly learning, you're constantly asking yourself questions about how does something work, you're curious about the future. I think that allows you to approach the world optimistically and know that you're always kind of improving gradually over time, and creating that culture within a team, I think is also quite empowering. That's the way that I like to work with people. I think that's a kind of great cultural thing. One of our, leadership charter items is always about kind of being curious, thinking about that continuous learning. And then I think probably coming back to the other one is that importance of reminding people and placing people within the strategy and purpose. So that point of repetition and making sure that everyone knows where their work contributes and make them feel kind of empowered to do that. I think that's important. And you made the point that often you feel like you're repeating yourself a lot, but actually that's not the case. You're not the oracle. People are not, listening to every word you say all of the time. And so making sure that you're doing a great job of that communication about where this project sits within the strategy and purpose is really important.
And so what's next for you personally and the RHS, which I assume is obviously some cones being removed from
I'm
site?
get the high vis on and move the cones. I think, that the remark about the cones, it's about growth. I think I'm really excited for growth for the RHS, what we can do, how much more impact we can have in the programs we run with learners and students and science, and what we can do for gardeners and for the well-being of all, really. I'm excited about that project overall. I'm excited about the growth that we can get from membership, from new things like RHS Grow or digital experiences, ways for supporters to engage with us digitally. I just think there's a lot out there for lots of different audiences who engage with the RHS for us to do more and do better. So it's a full list of fun things that we can get stuck into.
Thank you so much, Martine. It's been an incredible, very fast 60 minutes that have flown by, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.